The start of the fantasy season is here, Dan. And obviously, man, we come into this season with a lot of hype, a lot of expectations for our fantasy teams. But we got to start with some kind of somber stuff, man. We got injured players, bro. Like
Already.
already, man. We got Embiid. He's dealing with an injury, not expected for the season opener. I feel like every time I see a drop down, it says this player is not ready to is going to be out for the season, and then it clips off, and then it says
Yeah.
season opener. So just a lot of injuries here, man. We're talking about Paul George, Joel Embiid, man. Talk about some of these injuries, especially leading off. Let's lead off with Joel Embiid, my man.
Yeah, let's start off. I mean, it's not anything that we weren't surprised about. Like a week and a half ago, the Sixers were already talking about how he's going to be load managed, how he's going to be missing periodic times on the court with his as he's dealing with his injuries. But like, it's a bigger question about like what's the deal with Joel Embiid? He went to the Olympics, played, was overweight, comes back, loses weight, and then all of a sudden he's on some like individualized program. He's not ready to play for the opener. So like it just looks sketchy. That's why his ADP was falling. If you went to drafts this past weekend, he probably maybe went to the second round in some places. This is something we're gonna have to deal with. So the fact that he's out on the opener on Wednesday, he's going to be ruled out on Friday. We may not see Joel Embiid until next week at this point, and that still could be a little optimistic. Same thing goes for Paul George. He had that injury with a bone bruise in his knee. He hasn't been cleared. He's been practicing. Like I've seen him getting up shots, but it doesn't look like he's taking contact yet. So he could be out also for the rest of the week. So just continue to monitor it and make sure you're looking out for someone like Kelly Oubre if he's on waivers. He's only 32% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and I think that's somebody that could fill in real nicely right now.
No, it's a really good point, man. And this is the opportunity. I mean, when people get injured, there's new opportunity for others. And even if it's just for the first couple of weeks, you want to make sure players like that just aren't floating around on waivers. Players that might have additional opportunity when it comes to, especially some of those counting stats, right? The points, rebounds, assists. And you talked about, Kelly Oubre. Andre Drummond is another name. He's been
Yep.
working on his 3-point game. He was one of the league leaders during the preseason in rebounds. So it feels like he's coming into this year. He said he wanted to be the greatest rebounder ever. That's what he called himself. So let's see if we can see, some added motivation here for Andre Drummond. And, outside of like free throw shooting and, unfortunately turnovers for him, it seems like he might even be a bargain in fantasy. He's kind of been one of those outliers at times when he gets really good minutes. He's averaging well over 10 rebounds a game, shooting a really high field goal percentage. I think Andre Drummond is the kind of player that maybe he hurts you in a few categories, but if he's floating around there in your leagues, he's worth a flyer on at least through a good portion of the season because we know Joel Embiid's not going to be playing in these back-to-back games.
It's crazy because I think he should be a must roster guy. Like he's only 33%. Like he's right there with Kelly Oubre right now. You got to scoop him up if he's available on waivers because this is going to be something that's not going to be changed. Like Andre Drummond's going to be playing a lot this year. That's why they went out and got him. He had 20 rebounds in 26 minutes the other day in a preseason game. Like just off the rebound strength alone, like he could help you win that category. He's also good at steals too. Not really great for blocks, but I mean, for someone that can get that many rebounds, like that's a person that I'd want to target. And I think it's actually really close to another guy that like had a really good monster game. I know Donovan Clingan had like a really strong preseason.
Yeah.
Like, is that a guy that you think you'd be like interested in stashing right now? Because I mean, if you're looking at upside, we know what the Portland Trailblazers are going to be. Eventually, it's going to be like this rebuild is going to just give the young players all the minutes. So, like, is it too early on Clingan? Like, is that somebody you're watching?
No, I'm like all in on like watching Klingon right now because this is the kind of player that can change your team, right? You talked about Drummond as being like the guy that can like get those rebounds and like 20 rebounds in a game. Klingon's the type of player, if he gets more playing time, especially as the season progresses, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for him. The blocks were there this preseason. He was top 5 in rebounds per game this preseason. So we know the counting stats are going to be there for him. And the one thing is just what's the opportunity? We have DeAndre Ayton in front of him on a bad Portland Trailblazers team. And Robert Williams, who's been really injury prone over his career, is expected to return here early in the season and probably eat up some of these minutes. So it's all about playing time with Klingon. And for me, he's been one of these guys in the early parts of the preseason that's showing me, listen, maybe I know the Zach Edey hype is there for rookie of the year and in fantasy, but like, maybe we're missing out on a guy who was just as good in college, Donovan Clingan, just as good damn near, and was the higher draft pick of the two. I'm like, maybe we're just overlooking him coming into this fantasy year.
Yeah, I think it's probably Edie gets the edges because he's starting off the rip. But I think if you're playing the long game here, and I don't even know if this is necessarily a long-term play. I think Klingon might actually have value now if you need a guy that can get blocks and rebounds. This is about building out depth and playing for the future, right? So I think we can pretty much tell, like, DeAndre Ayton, like, he has a floor, but at some point, him and Jeremy Grant are probably going to be the names that start popping up in trade talks.
Yep.
And what you want to be ahead of the game before that happens. So I think he could have that standalone value, kind of similar to the way Walker Kessler was always fantasy relevant, even if he was playing, 15, 20 minutes. As long as Robert Williams isn't going to play, which it doesn't sound like he's like super optimistic to be getting back in the rotation after he hasn't, this dude has had a pretty significant layoff, right? So
Yeah.
I think Klingon might actually be that backup big to start the season here.
Well, and that's that's one of those things where you got to find these early season guys, the value a little bit earlier, and you can find that a lot during preseason. Dan, like you can watch, and obviously there's new roles, there's rookies, but who are some other players that you're looking at right now preseason wise? Because that's where I think sometimes we're like, oh, it's just preseason, like nobody's playing hard, but there's been guys playing minutes. A lot of the top five, scorers in points per game basis are guys and names that we know. Like, talk about who you've seen this preseason. Somebody you've had your eye on that is probably going to take a leap in fantasy this year.
Yeah, I think person that I'm like kind of curious about that had a really strong preseason, I'm wondering it's going to translate, is Dyson Daniels. He started four of the preseason games for the Atlanta Hawks. And from what he's done last year, in the Pelicans, he was like a good stocks guy, could get assists, could get rebounds too, because he's tall. He's like 6'6" or 6'7" or something like that. So I think Dyson Daniels at only 17% roster is someone that people need to be looking at more. And if he continues to start, I mean, that's going to be a really nice counting stat guy that you got for super cheap. And then also taking a look at Peyton Pritchard, he had one of the best advanced stats in terms of preseason value. And I think if you're looking at just week one, this is a guy that's going to have 2 quality starts on Tuesday and Thursday. Those are 2 of the lightest slates of this week. So you're going to be able to get short-term value out of him immediately. Friday and Saturday have 10 games, so you're not going to be able to play all of your guys on your bench on those days. So this is where you can get that leg up on your league mates, grabbing a couple guys from the Boston Celtics. The Minnesota Timberwolves is another team. Jaden McDaniels is another guy that played really well in the preseason that I think could be a good short-term ad right now.
No, you mentioned in one, you talked about Dyson Daniels. Like, that's a very sneaky name because he was a kind of an underrated piece in that DeJounte Murray deal where we didn't really talk about the impact. And then you look at the Hawks, right? Like last year, me and you were talking about how this team was full of fantasy-friendly options. And obviously, you got your Bogdan Bogdanovic is still there. You have, Jalen Johnson just got paid. We'll talk about him in a second. And then, you obviously have like guys like Daniil Hunter who are still searching for more opportunity. But here comes the Dyson Daniels who, for all intents and purposes, he could hold his own on the NBA court. And I think we're going to get to see some opportunity with him as well. So that's a good point there. A guy that I've been looking at, and he's kind of had value, and even last year he had some good value, but Tyus Jones, it seems like there's a real big opportunity here playing with this big three in Phoenix with Beal, Durant, and Devin Booker. And I mean, he had a really strong showing this preseason, and it feels to me this is a guy that could touch 9 to 10 assists and be one of the assist leaders in the league. He always plays a really clean game. He's a very efficient player, and I talk about this, Dan, a lot. Like, efficiency for me is how you win category leagues. That's where you can find some underlying stats and find some underlying value. Excuse me, but I think Tyus Jones in this setup, it sets up really nicely for him because he's going to have easy opportunities to score because of the floor spacing that's going to be there on this team. He's going to be able to have a high assist total with some of the league leaders in field goal percentage and opportunities within field goals. So I love this setup for Tyus Jones. He's been somebody I've been watching this preseason, and it feels like he could have a bigger season than we're even thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fantasy managers wised up to the fact that he's, I'm saying, one of the cheaper, best point guards you can have, especially late in drafts. I mean, I think right now he's like 80% rostered in Yahoo leagues. So he's a person that if I'm looking for back end depth, maybe you didn't go heavy on assists. Maybe you can trade, one of your forwards or one of your centers depths just to pick up a guy that can get, I'm thinking at least 6 or 7 assists. I mean, 10's probably on the high end, just considering that, Devin Booker's still going to be taking care of the ball at times. Bradley Beal will still have his moments at point guard. But I think if you're looking at this team, the floor has just been raised, and they actually have somebody that can facilitate the offense. I think it's going to benefit everybody else in terms of their efficiency. And then, he takes care of the ball too, and he's good at steals. He can shoot threes. when Mike Budenholzer's offense, man, like his offense is probably going to be better. So from what we saw with the Wizards. I mean, the Wizards were a disaster last year, and he still put up 12 points. 7 assists. So I think you could probably put up, closer to 13 points, 7 assists with some really strong peripherals. That's a really good point guard that you got in the back end of your drafts.
Yeah, preseason, that's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at like where are we gonna find this a little extra value when it either comes to draft day costs or free
Mm-hmm.
agency, or maybe like we talked about earlier with the injuries,